Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, pop culture aficionados, and comic book fans, and the morbidly curious all over the world. This is where you come to ask me, a comic book professional of long standing and world renown, about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's get right to the first of your many incredible questions this week. At WTK6069, is that what they call you at home? Chuck, you recently mentioned the projects you're most proud of, and what about the other extreme? Are there any comics you wish you had done better in hindsight? I'll tell you, one I regret is Green Lantern New Corps, which was a two-issue prestige thing. It's like 96 pages of comics by me and Scott Eaton. And this is I think the first time I got to work with Scott Eaton. We worked together quite a bit at CrossGen. But I dig me some Scott Eaton artwork, and this was a pretty cool opportunity that editor Kevin Dooley offered me to recreate a new characters in a new Green Lantern Corps with Kyle Rayner as the most prominent character. And it's a space-going cosmic adventure and blah, blah, blah. And it had all that fun stuff. And, Scott Eaton with his tremendous handle on science fiction imagery as well as superhero action. It was just it was a blast to work on. But what I proposed early on when I first started getting into the story was, because it was planned as a two-part prestige thing, I said to Kevin Dooley, my editor, I really think this needs to be 3 parts, because we introduced the characters in part 1. They're brought together by happenstance because they all oppose this particular villain. And I said, so they get together in the first part, and in the second part, they go take the villain down. It seems to me there needs to be some middle ground here, some story in the middle where they go on a different adventure, face some kind of a challenge that brings them together as a group. I mean, that's the way you tell these stories, right? I mean, it seems like the reader would expect that we would get to know these characters a little bit better outside of the realm of the big through story about hunting down the villain. Thinking here about a plot line I often highlight, the plot line The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, in which, there's a lot of middle ground in that movie where we learn about the characters and their interrelationships and sort of explore who they are and, betrayals and setbacks and all the rest of it. And this story kind of lacks all of that. And I explained, look, we should do a third volume, a middle volume, and it would also give us more room for our big climatic ending, because we can have some of that spill over toward the end of the second part. And, in other words, a 3-act story, each issue being an act. And Kevin said, no, he didn't see the need of that until it came out. And then he said, you know what? You were right. We should have had that middle part. A little frustrating. A little too late now to go back and do it since it's in publication. It's a pity because with a third part, it would have made a big chunky trade paperback. It would have been, well over 100, close to 150 pages of material, and would have made an attractive paperback until, one big honking story instead of a, kind of big honking story, but just it was plotted like a samurai movie, 2 acts. Samurai gets pissed off, samurai kills everyone. So anyway, David Jordan, have you ever read the UK war comic called Commando? If so, what do you think of the simple 2 or 3 panel pages they used? It's a very unique way to do a comic in my mind. I never saw a comic done that way before. Yeah, I'm very familiar with Commando and a bunch of the other like digest size black and white comics, war comics published in Britain, still published to this day, as far as I know. I have a couple of shelves full of these massive collections some of the publishers did in recent years, where they just piled a whole bunch of these into these just enormous thick door stopper books, and and they're on better paper and printed a little larger. And I went through them like salted peanuts. I really dig these things. And when I was in Britain, the one time I was in the UK back in the early 70s, I found these bunch of these at a newsstand, and I brought home a pile of them because they were cheap. And just jammed them into the old suitcase along with all the other crap I brought back, and read them a number of times. Really enjoyed them, and it is an unusual format compared to American comics. As you said, it's usually 2 panels per page. These really aren't comics in the American sense, of the traditional sense of being comics, because there's no attempt to do any kind of cinematic storytelling. There's no concern about page turn panels or all the rest of it. It's just the basics. And these, Commando and the War Picture Library and all these others, they did promote themselves as illustrated war stories. I very rarely saw them use the word comics. And maybe that was because they didn't want the stigma of a comic book. Maybe they saw that as for children, but an illustrated war story sounds something like a grown-up man might want to read. But for whatever, they're still comics, even if they're not traditional. And they still involve, panel composition and visual storytelling and characterization and all the rest. So yeah, I dig them. I like them. And the format's kind of cool. I wouldn't mind seeing. I don't want to see them at that. This is like an English, British, UK way. This is their thing. I don't think Americans should adapt it. It's just one of those peculiarities of comic book storytelling. This was adopted by the British publishers, and it's kind of unique to British publishing. And it's cool. I like this stuff. I like it. As I said, I've read a ton of them. Paul Redford, could you please share tips for writing women when you're a man? I'd love to write female characters, but I worry they'd feel unrealistic. I kind of made my name early on writing female characters. Was for some reason handed female characters because it was perceived that I was adept at writing them. Now, I'm not going to explain women to you, but I can explain how to write them. And I think a lot of my handiness at writing female characters comes from growing up the youngest of 3 children, and I had 2 older sisters who were, 7 and 8 years older than me. So I kind of got to, when you're a kid, when you're the little brother, you're the fly on the wall. So I kind of got to observe my sisters a lot, through all their emotional ranges and problems at school, problems with boyfriends, problems with my parents, all the rest of it. I got to see them at their best, at their worst. And I think that's the key, that you've got to show women at their best, at their worst, just like any character. And you got to treat them, not like a male character. You have to treat them differently. It's okay to show women as emotional. It doesn't make them weak. Women are different than men in that, and this is science, my friends. Women are different from men in that they can be emotional and still make sense at the same time. If you've ever had an argument with a woman, you know what I mean. Where you as a guy, I act like I'm speaking only to guys. I'm sure there's women listening to this, and they'll agree with me. I'm not mansplaining anything here. I'm just telling you that when a man argues with a woman, or a woman argues with a man, the woman generally wins, at least on points, because if the man gets angry, if he gets emotional in any way, he stops making sense, and he starts being defensive, and all the rest of it, and at the worst, abusive. Women can be mad as hell and still make perfect sense, because they use because, again, science. A woman's brain is constructed differently than a man's. There's a center valley down the center of your brain called the corpus callosum. And in a man, it's pretty narrow. In a woman, it's wider. So this is the chasm that separates the left and right hand side of the brain. So when a guy gets ticked off, he's not making any sense. He's not intellectualizing. He's not able to put together rational thought as easily or at all in some cases, depending on how emotional you get. And a woman, because her corpus callosum is wider, she can think and emote at the same time. And so when a woman shows, I'm not saying when a man shows emotion, it's weakness, but when a woman shows emotion, it's not weakness, okay? The other thing to remember is that women are the underdog. It's like when you're writing a child character or an animal, women are perceived as the underdog. And if you're writing a female heroine, I mean, she's got to come out on top, using wits or ruthlessness or whatever, But the mistake a lot of people make currently, like in the last few years, in the shadow of third wave feminism, is to make women who are just better than men in every way, without ever working at it, without ever doing anything to earn it. And I think men and women are equal in different ways. I think men and women complement one another. Both genders complement one another, and that's the way it's meant to be. If any of you married folk out there, you understand that your marriage works because one spouse's weaknesses and strengths complement the others. Now, if you have a man and wife and they both have the same weaknesses and the same strengths, I mean, generally it's a lot of trouble because they're not moving forward as a unit. But yeah, I'm getting way too far in the weeds here. But yeah, I mean, you got to think about women that way. It also helps to know some women. You actually have had experience around women, and I don't mean romantically or anything else. I mean, women that you've worked with. I mean, in my case, it was my sisters. I just lived with them. I just saw them, without them, I saw them unguarded, I'm the little brother, they're not even paying attention to me. So I'm just getting to watch, what they do, what they go through, and everything else. And so I think that's the big thing when writing women. I'll probably come up with a dozen other things after this, and maybe I'll address them in the next episode. But, generally that's how you have to think about it. And as a writer, don't worry about getting things wrong, because writers tend to, any good writer uses an equal amount of confidence and ignorance. So you just can't worry about this stuff. You can always run your writing by a woman whose opinion you trust, to see if you got it right. But, another thing to remember about female characters is that women are always examining their relationships. You know this if you're a guy, and like my wife will say, why are you friends with him? And it's like, well, we've known each other since kindergarten. Well, yeah, but why are you friends with him? I just told you, we've known each other. It doesn't matter if he turned into a mass murderer or whatever. He's my friend because we were friends in kindergarten. Whereas a woman is always asking, what did they mean by that? A woman is examining her relationships with her family, with her friends. She's always examining, where do I stand with them, and where do they stand with me, and why did they say that, and why did they do that, and everything else. So with a woman, their relationships are always in flux, and guys are like, yeah, he's my friend. We liked the same movie once, and that's the basis for a lifelong friendship. Whereas with a woman, it's like you have to keep earning it, and that's true in the romantic sense as well. If you get involved with a woman romantically, you have to keep earning her interest. Whereas basically she earned your interest the first time you saw her. And you're not asking any more of her than that. but she's always like, you gotta prove your worthiness, which is the way it should be. Which is the way it should be. So anyway, I probably just confused everybody, but maybe some other questions will be asked in the future so I can further clarify this. But yeah, don't be afraid to write women. Okay. Ace Mowick, since you've mentioned before that you're not too fond of Spielberg films, specifically as overtly sentimental movies, I was wondering if there are any movies of his that you enjoy that aren't what you consider sentimental. It's not just the sentimentality. He's made some, just straight up action films that suck. Minority Report, I don't think there's any sentimentality. It's just a bad movie. The two movies by him I like, first of all, Raiders of the Lost Ark is seamless. It's a wonderful movie from beginning to end. There is nothing wrong. I have no complaints. And there's no sentimentality. And the reason for this, why do I like this one so much better? And why objectively is it so much better than most of Spielberg's output? And the answer is simple. I've explained this in other videos, but I'll explain it again. Spielberg was at a career low when he made Raiders. He had made a couple of flops, and one of them nearly brought down 2 studios, not just one. Universal and Columbia went all in on 1941, and it was, wow, it's this legendary money loser. They just lost a fortune making that movie. Nobody went to see it. And, they had all these high hopes for it. So he arrives at Raiders of the Lost Ark with his career in jeopardy. Is he going to have to go back to television? He's over as a director. All the promise of Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which I don't think Close Encounters of the Third Kind is a very good movie, but he got a lot of attention for it. And then he becomes a bit of a player with movies like Poltergeist and stuff like that. So he comes into Raiders, basically his old pal from film school, George Lucas, says, "Yeah, come in and direct this." And Spielberg realizes that Raiders has to be a good movie. It has to be a success. It has to be a hit. And so he admits in interviews, and has done this numerous times, that he worked harder on Raiders of the Lost Ark than any movie he'd ever worked on. He was there on the set every day, which you'd think a director would always be on the set every day, but Spielberg is famous for being absent from the set and just allowing, whoever to put the scenes together. But no, he was there every day. He was intrinsically involved in the storyboarding, storytelling, production, art, set design, everything. He was doing everything a director should do. Working from the time he woke up in the morning till the time he went to bed at night, trying to make this the best movie he could. Working hard with the actors, reshoots, thinking through how can we do the scene better, what would improve it. And he had challenges in this movie he had never faced before. Raiders of the Lost Ark is the very first shootout he had ever filmed. He had never filmed a shootout before. A movie, especially an American movie staple, the firefight. He had never done that. And so he thought about, how he would present that, how he could do it differently. He was just more into it. And it shows. I'm not going to deny he's a skilled filmmaker when he works at it, but he so rarely works at it. And you'll hear stories by people who on the set about how this guy is he's lazy. He knows he has his bag of tricks. He knows what to do. He generally stays with safe material and just kind of half-asses it. And that's what I don't like about his stuff. It's just predictable and mushy. The other movie, obviously, is Jaws, a movie that he had to work very hard on. It's his first big feature. He's got a bit of a reputation as a wunderkind, and they give him this huge project. There was a lot riding on this baby. Zanuck and Brown, the producers at Universal, they were hot on making this a big movie. Of course, they had no idea it was going to become the enormous phenomenal success that it became. And but you know, this thing was groomed from. I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh, it was based on a novel by Peter Benchley." No, Peter Benchley's deal was he was writing a novel with a movie deal in mind. They had this high concept about this shark attack movie, and they were going to make it. And they just, everybody thought it was gold, and it was. It's gold. And so Spielberg gets on board, and it's a tough shoot. Anytime you shoot in water, it's tough. And now they're shooting with a giant mechanical shark, something nobody had ever done. They really didn't think about how to do the shark going into this thing. And they sort of cobbled together this giant mechanical shark, which, you know, Hollywood legend has it rarely ever worked the way they wanted it to. And now I'll hand it to Spielberg for he shot this movie like a Hitchcock film, which, you know, I think was the right approach. Even used a bunch of Hitchcock tricks, and that's cool. The actors do a terrific job. He obviously worked a lot with them because they deliver their lines in a way that made the dialogue delivery in Raiders successful. They just throw their lines away. They don't step on their jokes. They don't go, "Hey, here's a funny line." They just sort of say it in passing, which makes it much more effective than stepping on it or drawing the audience's attention to it, because we're not idiots. You know, we know when we're being pandered to, and this movie does nothing to pander. I rewatched it like 2 nights ago, and it really is a good movie. The setup, everything. I mean, they don't make movies like this anymore, and hats off to Spielberg. But I also got to give hats off to Verna Fields, who was the editor on this movie. And the editor, you know, watching this movie for the umpty-umpth time the other night, I was paying particular attention to the editing. And the woman did a great job, and she had a hard job to do because the mechanical shark works so lousy. They didn't get a lot of great footage with it where it looked convincing. And so Verna Fields had to work around all of that. You know, there's not a whole lot of shark in this movie because they didn't get much usable footage. And so she does an amazing job of incorporating what little decent footage of the mechanical shark and live sharks they had, and really makes it just a seamless, smooth, just slick storytelling exercise. So as much as we laud Spielberg for his efforts on Jaws, you really got to give equal credit to the Verna Fields for rescuing this movie. It could have been a mess. It could have been, you know, because like, you know, one time, I mean, 3 or 4 frames where that shark doesn't look real and the audience laughs and the whole movie falls apart. And so we got to give her equal credit for the, you know, incredible success that Jaws had back, especially in the summer of 75. Hey, have you subscribed? Subscribe. If you haven't, you know, if you have subscribed, thank you. If you haven't, is what I meant to say. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, hit the button below, and that's the last time I want to mention it. Okay, David Jordan again. I just finished No Man's Land, and I was wondering what you thought about Denny O'Neil's character, Nick Scratch, a shock rock Marilyn Mason type with college degrees, being so instrumental in having Gotham City declared a no man's land. I can buy a media darling intellectual being able to sway the public to support something like that, especially since he has the power of persuasion as his superpower. But making him also a shock rock type guy pulled me out of it. I have a lot of problems with Batman No Man's Land. And it's not just Nick Scratch. I didn't like the way this was set up. It's why I didn't play a big part in No Man's Land. First of all, I had been fired off of Detective Comics, so I was told my participation in this crossover would not be anticipated. But when I found out that Bob Gale, the guy that wrote Back to the Future in 1941, by the way, was going to be involved, and also Larry Hama was being brought in, I basically said, look, I just want to be in the room. I just want to be in the room. And I was in the room for one day. and I think I asked too many questions. I was the guy I was the annoying guy in the room with his hand up all the time, because a lot of the logistics of No Man's Land didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me politically. It didn't make sense to me, logistically. I thought there should have been more time, not with this Nick Scratch character and all the rest of it. I just thought that the city, it would have been better if the city just fell apart due to mismanagement. And the thing is, that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing our urban areas mismanaged into death spirals, and it isn't someone doing it. Well, I think a lot of it, you have people in positions of power who shouldn't be in positions of power, who are deliberately managing the decline of our urban centers, many of our urban centers. Um, but but there's a lot of things involved, the crime and all the rest of it. Now, remember, at the time of No Man's Land, Gotham had suffered a contagion, this pandemic that wiped out a lot of the population, and an earthquake, and all the other shenanigans that go on in Gotham City, which when I came on the franchise, we'd already decided that Gotham City was like New York in the 70s. It had lost a lot of its population. It moved out because the city was in such dire straits. And now you have an earthquake and a pandemic, and reducing the population further, and then causing more people to leave, rising crime, corruption, all the rest of it. I thought that Gotham City should have been allowed to simply collapse on its own. It collapses through mismanagement. It collapses through a falling population, and anarchy ensues. Less cops on the street. I mean, everything we're seeing now in cities like New York and Washington and Portland and San Francisco, and instead of making it like a guy with a superpower to motivate people, I didn't see where that how that was going, and there were a lot of other things I just didn't like about the series and how it was set up. So I had problems with Nick Scratch. I think they were trying to make it feel contemporary, because Howard Stern was still a big thing, and but I don't remember much about Nick Scratch. I know I wrote a bunch of Road to No Man's Land stories, the setup stories, and I enjoyed them. I mean, they kind of brought me, and I think Doug wrote some too. They brought him back to do some of that Road to No Man's Land stuff, and that stuff was cool. I never really got into the Nick Scratch character. I never really understood, his minions who wore like Satan faces. I didn't think that was terribly imaginative. Um, you know, had I had my druthers, I guess, looking back, I didn't think of this at the time, but I would have just brought back Bane to bring down Gotham. That would have made more sense. And I think readers would have liked it better. I mean, who even remembers Nick Scratch other than you? Because I didn't remember him until you reminded me. So, yeah, just one of my many problems with that whole run. Dara O'Sullivan. You've made no secret of your indifference to the work of Christopher Nolan. However, his Dark Knight trilogy is considered by some to be not only the best depiction of Batman ever, but probably the finest series of superheroes ever made. What do you think of the Dark Knight trilogy in general, and Tom Hardy's portrayal of Bane in particular? Yeah, I'm not a Nolan fan. I will say that his Batman trilogy is probably the most consistent in quality. Consistent in look and tone and intent. I just don't like the way he approaches story, and the way that Christopher Nolan approaches story, particularly on movies like this, is to just film and film and film and film and film whatever comes to his mind. Sit down with the studio execs and show them a five-hour director's cut, and then hand it over to the editors to try to dig through all of that to find an actual movie. And I think the work suffers because of that, because it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of thought put behind, why things are happening or when they're happening. And again, logistics. I have a real hard time with the Batman movies as far as logistics. particularly Dark Knight Rises, where they somehow get the entire Gotham police force to go down in the sewers and stay there for apparently months, with no food or clean water or clothing or places to sleep. And yet when they emerge from the subway months later, they're all still in their perfectly pressed uniforms and clean shaven. The most ludicrous scene in the movie, the most laughable one, is Joseph Gordon-Levitt lowering what looks like a Chinese takeout dinner for four down a manhole cover to feed what would have to be 10,000 cops. One would hope he would come back with more, like a dump truck full of takeout. And that's only one meal. What else did they eat the rest of the time? One does not want to think about it. But yeah, and the best superhero comic book movies of all, man, that's a low bar. That is a low bar. I would definitely place the three Iron Man movies above Christopher Nolan's three Batman movies. For consistency, quality, sense of humor, sense of story, emotional arcs, all the rest of it. The Iron Man movies, even if you have problems with the third one, they just simply work better for me than the Batman movies. I haven't liked the Batman movie since the 1966 one. So, but one thing I will agree with Christopher Nolan on, even though I don't like any of his movies, is that he's a fan of buying Blu-rays and whatever physical media you want. Buy Blu-rays, buy books, buy CDs. Don't rely on streaming or downloads or any of the rest of it, because you owning physical media gives you control over your own consumption of entertainment. And I am a big fan of that. Like, if I want to watch this movie, I'm going to watch it. And if I want to watch it, I want to watch it without stuff cut out of it for quote unquote modern audiences. I want to see the original as it was meant to be seen, as it was shown in theaters, or as it was originally aired on television. So I agree with Christopher Nolan on that. Physical media is king. Jonathan Bernakevich. I'm going to say Bernakevich. Shouldn't Superman be able to avoid most forms of hypnosis, such as pocket watches and screens with spirals, by simply turning on its X-ray vision? Because then Superman wouldn't be looking at the objects hypnotizing him. Has Superman ever done this, to your knowledge? You know what? I think you should get in a time machine and go back and write Superman stories in the 60s. That would have been a cool story, where we think Superman, man, they would have kissed you on both cheeks. Man, Superman gets hypnotized, but he's really not hypnotized, because we find out at the end of the story, he uses X-ray vision to confound the hypnotist so that he couldn't be hypnotized. But the story, I can see it now. The story would be, you can see the cover, some generic stage musician in his tuxedo and top hat, waving a watch in front of Superman, destroy the Daily Planet building. And Superman's like, yes, master. And, and Superman destroys the Daily Planet building, right? Of course, after everybody leaves and evacuate the building. And then we find out that there was a reason that the Planet building had to be destroyed. There was some structural damage or something. Superman was just going along with the gag to basically catch this hypnotist red-handed. See, I wrote you a whole Superman story. You could have written it. If you had a time machine, you'd be a comic book legend now for that one. But yeah, I don't think Superman would fall for hypnotism. He's too damn smart for that. But, I'm sure that there must be a story where they hypnotize Superman. There has to be. And then we find out he wasn't hypnotized, because he's Superman. Damian Field, I was wondering if you had watched the movie Dog Soldiers. It came to mind when watching the video, and you said something about there being no guilty pleasures, just things you like and shouldn't apologize for liking. You haven't seen it yet. It may be worth a watch, in my opinion. Yes, I have seen it, and as I said, many times, there's no such thing as guilty pleasures. If you like something, you like something. Don't apologize for it. And there's no reason to apologize for Dog Soldiers. This is a perfectly good, action horror movie. A bunch of Brit and Scott soldiers, you know, up in the Highlands, run into a bunch of werewolves while on maneuvers. What's not to like? This is a fun movie. And it's a good werewolf movie. It's a good action film. There's a lot of twists and turns and surprises, and you know, it's truly scary, suspenseful in a bunch of scenes. And you know, I liked it quite a bit. I like quite a bit of what Neil Marshall puts out. So there you go. What was it? His follow-up to this was Descent, I believe, about the women exploring the cave and finding like the inbred mutants hidden in the subterranean caverns beneath a mountain in Kentucky. That was a cool movie too. I like that. That was even more frightening than Dog Soldiers. Ramufan 1. Are there characters whose costumes or character design are so silly or poorly conceived that you don't care to read anything that features them simply for those reasons? In other words, you just can't handle even looking at them regardless of the story. Have you ever created a character whose design ended up being unpalatable to you, but contractually you were stuck with it? Yeah, Firestorm, it's just an idiotic look to me. I mean, a guy walking around and his hair is on fire all the time. Plus, he apparently walks around leaking radiation. I mean, who would want to be around this guy? Even if it's low levels, you know, if you were his neighbor, you'd be in trouble. You'd have all kinds of cancer problems just hanging around this guy. Yeah, I just never dug it. And the split personality in an attempt to make him interesting, and it's just, oh my gosh. A friend of mine got assigned Firestorm once, and he was so happy. And I just gave him my condolences. I just went, man, I'm sorry, man. I hope you get better stuff in the future. It's like, I think it was the character. I think he got it because no one else wanted to write it. I mean, not to say that he not very talented writer, but at that point in his career, you know, we've all been at that point in our career as comic book professionals, where it's like, the job, yeah, I'll take it. What's the character? Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, I love that character, even though you despise it. But Firestorm, I couldn't get into it. I had to refuse Firestorm if they offered it to me. Now, a character that I was unhappy, that I created, that I was unhappy with the final result. I created this character for when I was on my Catwoman run called Sly Fox, and I really wanted him to be sort of a foil, a continuing foil for Catwoman. He's a thief, he's a criminal, but there's sort of a cat and mouse thing going on between them, a little bit of sexual tension going on between them, and they're rivals, and sometimes they have to lie. You know the story. So I wanted him to be a recurring character that when Sly Fox showed up, it's like, ooh, cool, Sly Fox. And I was working with Jim Ballant at the time, and Jim Ballant and I created a number of characters working with Catwoman. And I was always pleased with his costume choices. I was always pleased with all the rest of it. But Sly Fox didn't come out quite the way I wanted. I wanted Sly Fox to be cool and dangerous looking, and, you know, just a perfect foil for Selena Kyle. Guys is too damn cool. And he came out looking like he got rejected for joining the Village People. The costume just didn't look cool. And he certainly didn't look terribly masculine. It just looked affected. And it kind of surprised me. I mean, Jim's Catwoman designs are so simple. She's just a skin tight purple leotard. But this guy, he added all kinds of belts and straps and a ponytail. Ponytails on characters. So yeah, this one was a bit of a disappointment. Sorry, Jim. I love you, Jim. You know I love you, Jim. But, you know, collaborations can't always be 100%. But, you know, the bright side, everybody's forgotten about this character until now. Okay, JDC. You've recently posted a few videos where you discussed how as a kid you weren't a fan of the Johnny Quest show, nor were you a fan of the stories of Space Ghost or the Hanna-Barbera cartoons in general. What were some of the cartoons you did enjoy as a kid, and why, regardless of whether they hold up today or not? Huge fan of Bugs Bunny. Love the Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny cartoons were still being shown in the movies when I would go to the movie theater. And also, he was on every single day in Philadelphia on the Sally Star Show. Anybody from Philadelphia will have, around my age, will have fond memories of Sally Star. She had a daily show on Channel 6, the station that I would eventually go to work at. And she would show Bugs Bunny and the Three Stooges and stuff like that. And I just fell in love with the Warner's characters. To this day, they're my favorite cartoon characters. Bugs, Daffy, Porky, Sylvester, Tweety, all the rest of them. In fact, if you're from Philadelphia, this will have some meaning for you. I ended up owning all of Sally Star's cartoons. They were on 16 millimeter. I was working at the station. And I became friendly with the guy who edited the movies. He would edit the movies for broadcast, either for time or commercial breaks or whatever. And I would hang out in the film department because I just liked talking to this guy. And he was a film editor. I mean, we would talk movies, we would talk stories. I just liked talking to this guy. And he knew I was a big aficionado, big movie guy, big movie nut. And he managed to tell me one day that we're getting rid of all these cartoons. We don't show them anymore. The older Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies. And he says, yeah, I'm going to be throwing them away in the dumpster later this afternoon. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And so he pitched all these 16 millimeter reels into the dumpster. I backed up the station wagon and loaded them in. Box after box after box after box of Bugs and Porky and Daffy and all the rest of it. And had a good time with my friends, watching them in our homes, and eventually traded them off for a bunch of stuff. With at the time, there was a whole community of guys collecting 16 millimeter cartoons. So I made a pretty good living off of that for a while, either trading or selling the cartoons off. So look, off on a tangent, but kind of proves my deep abiding love for the Warner Brothers characters. Another character I love was Droopy. I loved anything Tex Avery, although I didn't know who he was at the time. I loved all of his cartoons. My local movie theater, every once in a while, would have a program where they would just show 3 hours of cartoons. Instead of a Saturday matinee double feature, they would just show 3 hours of cartoons. And they would either be all Warners or all MGM. And the MGMs were not shown on TV, so the only place you saw them was in a movie theater. And so I got to see Droopy and Tom and Jerry and Screwball Squirrel and characters like that at the movie theater in 3 hour programs. And just fell in love with all that stuff. Another favorite on TV was Rocky and Bullwinkle, which to me, when I was a kid, I felt kind of sophisticated because there was something about Rocky and Bullwinkle that made me think this is really for grown-ups, which I think it was. It was filled with Air Force jokes and topical humor, which was, unusual. I mean, I'm watching Bugs Bunny and Daffy. It's all the jokes are from the 40s. Here's Rocky and Bullwinkle, and they're talking about stuff going on right now. And so I never missed an episode of them and all the ancillary characters. I love Mr. Peabody and Sherman and all the rest of it. So big fan of all the Jay Ward type cartoons. Now it's kind of odd as a kid because I liked experimental animation as well. Other kids just wanted cartoons they could laugh at, but I kind of like cartoons that either got serious or, used the medium in a different way. And my first exposure to that kind of cartoon was a cartoon called Monroe. And for some reason, it was thrown in, I guess it was produced by MGM. It was thrown into one of those 3 hour cartoon programs that I was just talking about. So in the middle of Tom and Jerry and Droopy and all the rest, here comes this cartoon called Monroe. It's directed by Gene Deitch, experimental animation guy, and written by Jules Feiffer. And it's a story about a little boy who's 4 years old and he gets drafted into the Army. And when I was a kid, first of all, I thought it was hysterically funny. And secondly, I thought it was touching. When you're a kid, you don't really, you're a little boy, you don't want to deal with those kind of emotions. But it was kind of, you're laughing at this, and then you kind of feel sorry for the kid because he really doesn't belong in the Army, but nobody seems to notice this. He's much shorter and much younger than the rest of them. Some clerical error by the government. And I just really dug this cartoon. I never saw it again. I never saw it again. In fact, I had to search and search and search to even get this image, which was from, I don't know what this was from. I guess pre-production or maybe even a book Pfeiffer did based on this story. But Monroe, if you ever get to see it. Another one I fondly remember was a cartoon called The Juggler of Our Lady. And Terry Toons used to have a show on Saturday mornings, and it would feature Hector Heathcote and 66 Sydney, who was a hypochondriac elephant, and the Hashimoto's, which were a bunch of mice who lived in Japan. I mean, these are really unusual cartoons. I was a really little kid, and they were theatrical cartoons that then they ran as a block early on Saturday morning. I think these things came on at like 6 in the morning, and they just threw in this cartoon called The Juggler of Our Lady, and it was a story about a monk who, at Christmas time, all the other monks are creating gifts, pieces of music and pieces of art and illuminated manuscripts to offer as a gift, a Christmas gift to the Virgin Mary, the statue of the Virgin Mary. And this little monk, the only thing he can do is juggle. And I just fell in love with this cartoon. I was probably 6, and I just thought this was the greatest cartoon. Part of the reason was it was narrated by Boris Karloff. And again, it's another one. I saw it once when I was 6, never saw it again, but never forgot it. It's just, once again, it was funny, but it was also touching as well. And a fine use of the animated form. So yeah, I was a weird kid. Okay, Psionic Q. I think DC Comics should work out a deal with Warner Brothers and J.K. Rowling, as someone is always correcting me, to publish a graphic novels based on Harry Potter. The Harry Potter books. Almost every Barnes & Noble I've been to has their own Harry Potter section. It's grown since the release of the illustrated versions of the books. I'm thinking that if they set their graphic novel series in the same section, not only would it attract potential newcomers, but also older fans who've grown up on Harry Potter like I have. Or do you think that the audience who read the books wouldn't be interested in comics? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Well, the phrase used in publishing whenever you would advance the idea of doing a graphic novel is added value. In other words, we've sold as much of this crap as we're ever going to sell. We're going to put it in a new form and sell some more. And something as evergreen as Harry Potter, it makes sense, doesn't it? It should be a graphic novel. But apparently, J.K. Rowling doesn't like comics, doesn't have any regard for comics. She's willing to have candy made out of these characters, everything you can imagine based on these characters. And she has very tight quality control, which I admire. She doesn't say yes to every deal that comes down the pike. She's got to be convinced. And apparently Warner's did not get the graphic novel rights. And I know for a fact, because I've known a whole bunch of authors who regret the fact that when they signed with Warner's, they signed over the graphic novel rights, which 9 times out of 10 means no graphic novel will ever get done. You lost the rights, but they're not going to produce anything. You're not going to see a dime from graphic novels or comics because they have no interest. They just want to hold the rights so someone else doesn't get them. But Rowling tightly controls any merchandising, any ancillary, anything involved with Harry Potter. And when she sold the movie rights or licensed or whatever she did, the movie rights to Warner, not sell off the graphic novel rights as well. And that remains to this day. And I know a bunch of comic book creators who would give their back teeth to work on Harry Potter. Big Harry Potter fans. I mean, these are top drawer, top guys that love to produce some quality Harry Potter. And it's a shame. It's a shame it's not being done because they did the illustrated versions, which were huge sellers. I mean, they sold those illustrated versions to people that had already bought and read the original hardcover versions. So, I don't think it's resistance from the Harry Potter audience. I think most of the Harry Potter audience would welcome a comic book. I'll tell you what would sell even better is a Harry Potter manga. If you adapted the Harry Potter novels into manga, not necessarily Japanese type artwork, but that format, that kind of page layout and storytelling, pacing, and everything else. Oh my goodness. How huge would that be? That would be enormous. So yeah, I think the only reason they don't do it is because Rowling has no regard for comics. And let's face it, this is a hard truth that I've learned over time, taught to me by Gary Koepp, that most people don't, it's not that they don't care about comics. Most people actively do not like comics. And J.K. Rowling is one of them, unfortunately. For the franchise, unfortunately for comic fans, unfortunately for Harry Potter fans, but that's the way it goes. And that's her right. And I have to bow to her right as an author, as a creator. And like I said, I respect her a lot for being so tight with the property that she owns, because if you don't watch out for yourself, nobody ain't going to watch out for you. That's for sure. Hey, Spin Rack is on Discord. And if you hit this old QR code here, they assure me it will take you to Spin Rack at Discord, where there's a growing community of both comic book professionals, comic book wannabes, comic fans, sharing ideas, sharing creations, critiquing each other's work and the rest of it. And Graham and I show up there as well and lend a hand. So Spin Rack Discord for everything Spin Rack. Hey, I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank you for listening, liking, subscribing, all the rest of it. And I'll see all of you down the